Something crazy just happened in the camera world, and it could have massive implications for the Nikon Z system moving forward. So let's jump right in and talk about it. What's up, y'all? It's Project Photography back with another video, and today, before we get started, make sure to follow all my socials down in the description bar below. But Sony just announced the Sony A9 III, which is fantastic and all, and I'm not really one who cares about Sony products, but this camera is absolutely huge for photographers. They announced what is called a global shutter inside of the Sony A9 III, and they have beat Nikon and Canon to the punch on this, and it's a huge slap in the face to both of those camera brands, because with Sony first announcing this, they're the ones that have their hands on this technology. It's the first of its kind for full frame cameras, and it's allowed the Sony A9 III to shoot 120 frames per second. That's right, 120 frames per second with full autofocus and full auto exposure, as well as in raw files. And this is absolutely crazy. I mean, this has never been done before. It's a first of its kind. But we first have to talk about what a global shutter is. And it's essentially a type of shutter that captures all the pixels at once simultaneously. Whereas a rolling shutter will capture all the pixels row by row from the top of the sensor all the way to the bottom until the image is fully captured. It's essentially been the mainstay in mirrorless cameras, and this has actually caused a few issues. First of all, we see those weird diagonals that appear. It's because of the rolling shutter. We see banding because of artificial light, also because of rolling shutter. And we see limitations with flash where we can't use shutter speeds over 1/250th of a second. And those limitations have been huge for photographers, as we haven't been able to get super clean images when shooting in all those scenarios. But with a global shutter, all those issues for both stills and video completely go away, and we're able to shoot far cleaner images at far faster frames per second shooting speeds with higher sync speeds and so forth. It just creates better images overall. And this is something that I've been waiting for quite some time, and I would argue is as revolutionary as DSLRs were to mirrorless as the rolling shutter is to global shutters. And now I'm not going to go out and buy a Sony A9 III. For me, it's just completely unnecessary, and I am a Nikon person for life. But I would love to see Nikon come out with something similar, and this brings up so many questions about Nikon's future in the mirrorless game. And mind you, everything that I'm going to be saying from here on out is purely my own opinions and my own speculations. You're more than welcome to come up with your own speculations, your own opinions. None of these are rumors, none of these are confirmed. It's just what I think. But before we go in and talk about that, let's take a quick break and talk about our friends over at Mint Mobile. Mint Mobile is our partner for today's episode, and today I'll be giving you the 3 best qualities that I have personally enjoyed while using Mint service. First off, switching was super easy, as it only took me 15 minutes to go from my previous phone carrier to Mint. Luckily, my phone allowed for eSIM cards, which allowed me to switch immediately from the comfort of my own home. And if you want to check them out, you can just scan the QR code on screen or check the link in my description. Second, they have great coverage as they're built on the nation's largest 5G network. It's allowed me to stream my favorite music while shooting, travel to my locations without a loss of service, and even allow me to check my notes when I'm creating content for you guys while on location. And best of all, I was able to save a ton of money because I switched to Mint, and the plans start at $15 a month, which has allowed me to travel farther for better landscape locations to shoot what I love to shoot. It's allowed me to experience more of the world and capture better photos because of the cost savings. So why pay more for the same access to the same network? And again, if you're interested, scan the QR code on screen or check the link in my description. Thank you again to Mint Mobile for partnering with us in today's episode. And with that being said, let's go right back, talk about the Nikon Z system moving forward. But now let's talk about the Nikon Z system moving forward and what the global shutter means to the system. So one camera that I can definitely see this being implemented to first would be a Nikon Z9 successor. Now we could call this camera the Nikon Z9 II, because the original Nikon Z9 had a stacked sensor, which definitely limited a lot of those rolling shutter issues. We saw limited banding, limited rolling shutter, and all those issues kind of be diminished to a degree. Just imagine having a Nikon Z9 II with a global shutter that completely eliminates all that. Imagine a completely eliminated rolling shutter, and we could have that Z9 II that shoots perfect video, perfect images, and even has 120 frames per second with that continuous autofocus, RAW, and has that auto exposure. It would be a beast of a camera, but this is not something that I expect to come out anytime soon. I mean, if you look at the different timelines between, let's just say when the flagship D4 and the D5 were released, that was about 4 years apart. right now as we stand, we're about 2 years removed from when the original Nikon Z9 came out. And if a Z9 II would be released and we look at those different timelines of 4 years apart, we could probably most likely see something come out in either late 2024 or early 2025. I mean, that is a very generous estimate of when a Z9 II with a global shutter would come out. Honestly, I could absolutely see it going way past that, just because, I mean, having this technology and implementing it will take some time. Sony has just eclipsed everybody. I mean, I honestly didn't even expect a global shutter to be released even at this point. But I mean, with technology rapidly improving, we have to expect Nikon to do something about it. They're not going to just watch their competitor release revolutionary technology and not do anything. But then you can absolutely see with a Nikon Z9 II, a Z8 II, a successor to the Z8, come out with a global shutter as well. To me, those two cameras are in lockstep with one another when it comes to, you know, how the technology has progressed and the different types of specs that come out. Those are both cameras that are pretty much in step with each other. And with a Z8 II, we're talking even years after the Z9 II were to be released. And at that point, Sony probably would have perfected the global shutter at that point, improving on the dynamic range and high ISO performance, because those are areas that the global shutter is definitely weak in. But I mean, just seeing how that technology and it coming out would just have major implications for a Z9 II, a Z8 II, but I just don't see it coming out in the near future at all, considering that Z8 was literally just released. And I think at that point, when global shutters are now more common to the masses, we're going to see camera systems that far exceed what a lot of photographers even needs are. I mean, honestly, when you looked at even the Z8, the Z9, you look at it and say, okay, we get 20 to 30 frames per second of continuous shooting. Like, do we even need that? Like, it's pretty incredible what those cameras are able to do. And to think that, you know, that technology can be extrapolated even farther out with a global shutter is just kind of crazy. But what would this mean for something like the Z6 or a Z7 or even the APS-C cameras? What I can definitely see happening is in probably a Z6 IV, I can't see a Z6 III having a stack sensor, but I can definitely see something like a Z6 IV having those stack sensors, as they want to differentiate the Z9, Z8 from the Z6, Z7 series. So if you had a Z9, Z8 with a global shutter, right, you can bring down these stack sensors, which at that point, they're going to have many of them available and at very reasonable costs. And, you know, it's technology that is outdated, quote unquote, to a point. So having the stack sensors in the Z6 and the Z7, let's just call them the Z7 Z6 IV, would be absolutely phenomenal. That's a camera that I would love to have. I just don't see a Z6 IV or a Z7 IV coming out with a global shutter. I just think it just wouldn't make sense considering what those cameras are and who they're aimed for. I can definitely see them differentiating those flagship cameras versus those more entry-level full-frame cameras. And when it comes to Nikon's APS-C line, I don't see them implementing stack sensors or a global shutter into it at all, to be quite honest with you. I can see them kind of sticking with the same technology for quite some years to come, unless they came out with a pro level Nikon Z90, let's just call it. That would be a D500 replacement. I could probably see a stack sensor there. I couldn't see a global shutter in that camera at all. I don't know if it would even make sense. So it's just really interesting to see and think about what the future of the Nikon Z system could look like because of how global shutters are going to shift the camera industry. I absolutely expect Canon to come out with something with a global shutter. That would be absolutely insane as well. And Sony would definitely continue to increase and implement their global shutter into far other cameras that would get much more benefit, like an A1 II would make sense. So I just think Z9 II, and we're talking about like multiple years from now when we see those cameras implement a global shutter. But when they do implement that, we're going to see the precipice of what true Nikon technology is going to look like. And honestly, I cannot wait for that to happen. But honestly, I think for now, like I can't imagine anyone being unhappy with a Z8 or Z9 right now. I think they already far exceed a lot of photographers' expectations and needs. So we'll just have to see what that looks like going forward. I don't have a magic wand or a hat that can tell me what the future holds. Of course, this is just pure speculation. None of this is confirmed, as like I said before. It's just fun to see and think about what a Nikon Z camera with a global shutter could look like. Anyways, guys, I really want to hear what your guys' opinions are down in the comment section down below about a global shutter on a Nikon Z camera. What would you want that to look like? What specs would you want to see? And yeah, thank you guys so much for experiencing the world with me today. Please feel free to rate, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.